I followed my fiancée to a motel and knocked. The door opened. Say was inside with another man. She covered her mouth when she saw me. He smirked and said, "Guess you found out." That's when. I did not follow Lydia because of intuition or paranoia. I followed her because she lied in real time, and she did it badly. She said she was driving to her cousin's apartment on the east side to help with paperwork for a new lease. She said it casually, without details, which was already unusual for her. Lydia always explained things in advance, as if she needed permission from the world to move through it. That night she did not explain. She only announced. 10 minutes later, while she was supposedly already parked, I saw her car pass my street. I waited long enough to be sure. Then I got in my own car and followed at a distance that felt boring rather than dramatic. She drove past the apartment blocks, past the shopping strip, and toward the highway. She took the exit for the old service road, the one lined with storage units, repair shops, and a motel that had been there longer than anyone admitted. When she pulled into the motel parking lot and backed into a space, I did not feel shocked. I felt confirmed. I parked 2 rows away and watched her sit in the car for a moment, checking her phone. Then she got out, adjusted her jacket, and walked toward the stairs without looking around. She already believed she was alone. I waited until she disappeared inside. Then I stepped out and walked to the office window. The clerk barely looked up when I asked which room Lydia Moore had checked into. I did not raise my voice or lower it. I did not threaten or beg. I said her name as if I belonged there. The clerk hesitated, then slid the registration book closer to himself, then glanced toward the hallway. He told me the room number without finishing his sentence. The hallway smelled like cleaning chemicals and old carpet. I walked the length of it without stopping. I stood in front of the door and heard voices inside. A man laughed. Lydia's voice followed, lighter than it had been in weeks. I knocked once. The sound inside stopped immediately. There was movement, hurried and careless. The door opened halfway. Lydia stood there, one hand already rising to her mouth. Her eyes widened, not in confusion, but in recognition. She knew exactly what I was seeing because she had been imagining this moment without expecting it to arrive so fast. Behind her, Dylan Price leaned against the dresser with his arms crossed. He looked relaxed. He looked entertained. He looked at me like I had interrupted a conversation he expected to finish. "Well," he said, smiling. "Guess you found out." I stepped forward before Lydia could speak. I pushed the door open the rest of the way and entered the room. I did not ask permission. I did not slow down. I did not raise my voice. I asked Lydia who he was and why she was here. She started explaining immediately, which told me more than silence would have. She talked about confusion, about timing, about things she had not figured out yet. Her words stacked on top of each other, unstructured and defensive. Dylan interrupted her without looking at her. He looked at me. "She told me you were out of the picture," he said. "Said you were a controlling ex she was stuck disentangling from." Lydia turned on him sharply. She said his name in a way that sounded like a warning rather than affection. He shrugged and raised his hands slightly, as if he was done participating. I asked Lydia why she told him that. She did not answer directly. She asked me to leave the room so we could talk privately. I told her we were talking now. I asked how long this had been going on. She hesitated for half a second too long. Dylan answered instead. He said they had been seeing each other for weeks. He said the motel was her idea because she did not want complications. He said she had told him the wedding was off but had not announced it yet. I asked Lydia if any of that was false. She shook her head without meeting my eyes. I told her to give me her phone. She said no. I told her that refusal was an answer. I turned and walked out of the room. She followed me into the hallway immediately, grabbing my arm. I removed her hand and kept walking. She asked me not to do this here, not to involve other people, not to make it bigger than it needed to be. I told her she made it big before I arrived. I stopped in the parking lot and called her father. Harold Moore answered on the second ring. I told him where Lydia was and who she was with. I told him calmly and without embellishment. I did not ask him to fix anything. Lydia screamed my name behind me. She cried harder when she realized I was not lying. Dylan came outside and told me to leave the property. He said the motel staff had been watching and he did not want trouble. I told him I was already leaving. When Dylan stepped closer, placing himself between me and my car, the clerk called the police. The patrol car arrived quickly, which meant someone had already had problems there earlier that night. The officers separated us and asked questions that required short, factual answers. I gave them. Lydia could not. There were no arrests. There did not need to be. The damage had already occurred. I drove home alone. Lydia did not come with me. By the time I reached my driveway, my phone was already vibrating. Lydia's mother, Sandra, left a message asking what happened. A mutual friend sent a text asking if everything was okay. Another asked why Lydia was crying at a motel. The story was already spreading, and it was spreading without structure. I did not respond that night. The next morning, Lydia showed up at the house before sunrise. She had not slept. She asked to come inside. I did not move from the doorway. I asked her what she planned to do with the money she transferred from our joint account 3 days earlier. Her face changed immediately. She asked how I knew. I told her the bank sent alerts. She said she was just reorganizing finances. I told her reorganizing finances usually happened after conversations, not before motel rooms. She tried to redirect the discussion toward feelings, toward stress, toward pressure. I told her those explanations were late. She asked if we could still fix this. I told her fixing something required honesty before discovery, not after exposure. She left without yelling. That worried me more than anger would have. By noon, Kevin Brooks from my office asked if I was okay. He said Lydia had called him weeks earlier asking about my salary progression and bonus structure, phrasing it as curiosity rather than strategy. That was when I understood the motel was not the beginning of anything. It was simply the moment when preparation met reality. And reality did not ask for permission. Lydia did not disappear after leaving the house. She retreated just far enough to regroup. By mid-morning, my phone was quiet in the way that suggested coordination rather than remorse. Silence, when it comes after exposure, usually means someone is organizing their version of events. I did not block her number. I did not confront her again. I let the day unfold on its own. It did not take long. At 10:30, Sandra Moore called again. This time she did not ask questions. She asked for context. The shift told me Lydia had already spoken to her, and whatever she said had gaps that required reinforcement. I met Sandra and Harold at a cafe near their house. I did not choose a private place. I chose somewhere with tables close enough to overhear tone without hearing content. Lydia was not there, which confirmed my suspicion that this was not a reconciliation meeting. It was a damage assessment. I told them exactly what happened at the motel, including Dylan's presence, his explanation, and Lydia's refusal to hand over her phone. I did not speculate. I did not dramatize. I did not ask them to take sides. Harold listened without interrupting. Sandra asked if I might have misunderstood. I told her misunderstanding required ambiguity, and there was none. When I mentioned the attempted transfer from the joint account, Harold leaned back in his chair and looked at his wife rather than at me. That was the first visible fracture. Sandra asked Lydia about the transfer while I sat there. Lydia answered on speaker. She said it was temporary. She said she planned to explain later. She said the timing was unfortunate. Harold ended the call. He told me Lydia had borrowed money from them the previous month to cover wedding-related expenses she claimed Nathan had delayed paying. He asked me if that was true. I told him no. Sandra's hand tightened around her coffee cup. The story Lydia had been telling was already collapsing under basic comparison. I left after that. There was nothing to win by staying. By the time I returned home, 2 vendors had emailed me asking to confirm changes Lydia attempted to make to our contracts. One referenced a payment delay request. Another referenced a cancellation inquiry that had not been finalized. I called each of them back personally. I told them no changes were authorized without both signatures. I told them payments would be frozen pending review. I asked for written confirmation of every interaction they had with Lydia in the last 30 days. They complied immediately. At noon, Kevin Brooks knocked on my office door and closed it behind him. He did not sit. He told me Lydia had contacted him 3 weeks earlier, asking if my bonus structure would change after the quarter closed. She framed it as curiosity, then pivoted to asking whether bonuses were guaranteed or discretionary. Kevin told me he thought it was strange at the time. He told me he regretted not mentioning it earlier. I told him he had nothing to apologize for. At 1:15, Dylan Price called. I answered because unanswered calls become narratives. He said he wanted to clarify a few things. He said he had not known Lydia was engaged in any active way. He said she told him the wedding was a formality already falling apart. He said he had no intention of being involved in conflict. I told him clarification after exposure rarely changed outcomes. He admitted she had asked him about timelines, about when he would be comfortable making things public, about whether he could support her if she needed to leave quickly. He said he assumed that meant emotional support. He said now he was not sure. I told him that uncertainty was his to resolve. He asked if I planned to escalate this publicly. I told him escalation happened when lies met witnesses. He hung up without arguing. At 2 o'clock, Lydia showed up at my workplace. She did not enter quietly. She did not ask permission. She stood in the lobby and demanded to see me. Security intervened when her voice carried beyond the front desk. I stepped out before they could escort her away. I did not want this filtered through policy. She accused me of humiliating her in front of her parents. She accused me of exaggerating the motel incident. She accused me of sabotaging her relationships. I asked her why she contacted Kevin about my income. She did not answer. I asked her why she told Dylan I was a controlling ex. She said that was how it felt. I asked her why she tried to move shared funds before leaving. She said she needed security. Security escorted her out before she could finish reframing. 3 co-workers witnessed the exchange. None of them looked surprised. That detail mattered. By the end of the day, messages began circulating. Lydia told one group she had been emotionally trapped. She told another the relationship had been open but undefined. She told a third that she had already ended things with me before the motel. The contradictions did not surface all at once. They surfaced person by person, conversation by conversation. Olivia Kent reached out that evening. She asked to talk. She did not defend Lydia. She did not accuse me. She said she felt uncomfortable with things Lydia had been saying for weeks and did not know what to do with them anymore. We met outside her apartment building. She stayed near the door, as if prepared to retreat. She told me Lydia had been planning an exit strategy for months. She said Lydia talked about timing, about optics, about how to control the story. She said Lydia wanted to ensure she left with sympathy and financial stability intact. Olivia showed me messages Lydia sent her outlining possible reactions from me and how to frame them to others. The messages did not mention feelings. They mentioned outcomes. I did not ask Olivia to send them to me. I did not ask her to confront Lydia. I told her she should decide what she wanted to do next for herself. She apologized anyway. That night, I froze the joint account entirely. I moved my paycheck into a separate account and notified the bank that no transfers were authorized without in-person confirmation. I filed a preliminary report documenting attempted unauthorized movement of funds. Lydia called repeatedly. I did not answer. At 11, Sandra Moore called again. This time she did not ask for context. She asked what Lydia had done. I told her everything, including Olivia's messages, the vendor emails, and the workplace incident. I told her I did not expect her to fix it. She told me Harold was furious. She told me Lydia had not told them about the attempted transfer or the workplace scene. She told me Lydia was asking them to cover wedding penalties she could no longer afford. Sandra asked me what I planned to do next. I told her I planned to stop participating in fiction. That was when I realized the story was no longer mine to control. It was hers to survive. By midnight, the wedding website was offline. The venue flagged the date as canceled pending payment resolution. Deposits were disputed. Guests started asking questions that did not have clean answers. Lydia texted one final message before dawn, asking if we could meet privately and talk calmly. I did not respond. The confrontation had already happened. Everything after that was accounting. By the third day, the situation stopped moving in lines and started moving in waves. I did not wake up to messages anymore. I woke up to consequences already in motion. Bank confirmations arrived before sunrise. Vendors followed. Then people. The order mattered because it told me who Lydia had tried to control first. The venue manager called at 7:30. She said Lydia attempted to reinstate the booking under a different payment plan using a partial deposit from her parents. The manager asked if Nathan Cole was still a party to the agreement. I told her no and asked for the attempt to be documented in writing. She agreed without hesitation. The florist sent a revised invoice reflecting cancellation penalties. The photographer asked whether Lydia still had authority to request edits to the contract. I forwarded the emails to my attorney and responded with a single sentence that clarified consent had been revoked. By 9 o'clock, the practical world had made a decision Lydia could not undo. She tried to reach me again through Sandra. Sandra asked if I would speak to Lydia for 10 minutes to help calm her down. I told her I was not responsible for managing Lydia's emotional transitions. Sandra did not argue. She sounded tired rather than defensive. At 10, Dylan Price's business partner, Mark Ellison, called me. He did not introduce himself as an ally. He introduced himself as a risk manager. He said Dylan's involvement in personal drama was becoming a professional issue. He asked me to confirm whether Dylan had known about the engagement. I told him exactly what Dylan told me at the motel and during our phone call. I told him I believed Dylan had been misled, but I also believed Dylan had chosen comfort over verification. Mark said that matched what he was seeing. He thanked me and ended the call. Dylan texted an hour later. He said he needed distance from everything. He said Lydia was unstable. He said he did not want his name associated with lies. He did not apologize. He did not need to. Lydia showed up at my house again that afternoon. This time she brought her sister, Camille Moore, who had been neutral until then. Camille stood behind Lydia on the porch, arms crossed, watching me with the kind of expression that suggested she was there to observe rather than intervene. Lydia asked if we could talk inside. I said no. She asked if I was enjoying this. I asked her what part she thought was entertaining. She said she made mistakes. She said she never meant to hurt me. She said I was taking things too far. I asked her why she attempted to reinstate the venue booking without telling me. She said she was trying to minimize losses. I asked her why she told Dylan I was a controlling ex. She said she needed him to feel safe. I asked her why she contacted Kevin about my bonus. She said she was curious. Camille finally spoke. She asked Lydia why her explanations kept changing depending on the audience. Lydia snapped at her sister to stay out of it. Camille stepped off the porch and told Lydia she was done being used as moral insulation. She apologized to me without theatrics and walked back to her car. Lydia stood there alone after that. She accused me of turning people against her. I told her people turned away when stories failed basic comparison. She left without resolution. Within hours, screenshots started circulating. Olivia did not release them publicly. She shared them selectively with people Lydia had already spoken to. That distinction mattered because it allowed comparisons without spectacle. The messages showed Lydia outlining possible reactions from me, including specific phrases she believed would make her look sympathetic. They showed her planning timing around financial access. They showed her awareness of consequences without concern for accuracy. People stopped asking me questions after that. They started asking Lydia different ones. By evening, Sandra called again. Her voice shook. She said Lydia had taken out a personal loan using Harold as an informal guarantor, assuming the wedding would close the gap. She said Lydia asked them to cover cancellation penalties and legal fees. Harold refused. Sandra said Lydia screamed at them, accused them of betrayal, and threatened to cut contact. Sandra said Harold told Lydia she needed to deal with the consequences she engineered. I did not respond immediately. Sandra asked if there was anything Lydia had not told them yet. I told her there was probably more, but uncovering it would not change the outcome. That night, Lydia attempted one last maneuver. She emailed my employer's HR department claiming emotional abuse and workplace harassment tied to our personal relationship. She framed the motel confrontation as stalking. She framed the office incident as intimidation. HR contacted me the next morning requesting a meeting. I brought documentation. I brought security footage from the lobby. I brought witness statements. I brought call logs showing Lydia initiated contact repeatedly after separation. I brought the police incident number from the motel. HR concluded the meeting in under 30 minutes. Lydia's credibility collapsed in a space where credibility was measured professionally rather than emotionally. At noon, Dylan's number disappeared from her phone records. He blocked her. Mark Ellison confirmed Dylan had stepped away from 2 pending deals to avoid reputational spillover. Lydia attempted to reframe the situation publicly that afternoon through social media, posting vague statements about healing and boundaries. People who had seen the messages did not engage. Silence was louder than argument. The wedding cancellation became official by end of day. Guests received notices citing unforeseen circumstances. Some reached out to ask questions. I answered briefly and honestly. Others chose not to ask at all. That night, Lydia sent me a message that did not ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. She asked if I would consider helping her financially to stabilize the fallout. I did not respond. By the end of the week, the damage was complete. Lydia lost the venue deposit entirely. She owed vendors penalties she could not shift. Her parents stopped covering expenses. Dylan exited without apology or explanation. Her social circle fractured along lines of trust rather than loyalty. She showed up one final time at my house near midnight. She did not cry. She did not yell. She looked smaller, not physically, but structurally, like someone who realized the system they relied on no longer responded. She said she did not think things would spiral this fast. I told her momentum belonged to decisions, not intentions. She asked if I hated her. I told her hate required investment, and I was withdrawing mine. She left without asking anything else. The next morning, my attorney confirmed most shared funds were recoverable. Some losses would remain permanent. I accepted that without argument. The situation had reached a point where escalation no longer benefited anyone. Collapse had already done its work. Everything that could break had broken. After the collapse, there was no dramatic silence. There was administration. People like to imagine consequences as explosions, but most of them arrive as emails with subject lines that do not raise your pulse. They arrive as calendar invitations, account statements, and confirmation numbers. They arrive quietly and demand attention anyway. The attorney I hired did not congratulate me. He did not frame the situation as a win. He outlined what could be recovered, what was already lost, and what would require time. He explained that shared finances dissolve slowly, even when trust disappears instantly. The joint account was formally closed within a week. Most of the remaining balance was returned to me. A portion had already been spent by Lydia in ways that were not technically illegal, only revealing. That money would not come back. I accepted that. The venue confirmed the loss of the main deposit. They provided documentation showing Lydia attempted to alter payment responsibility shortly before cancellation. That detail mattered later, when responsibility was assigned. Vendors followed with itemized penalties. I paid what I was legally responsible for and disputed what I was not. There was no satisfaction in that process, only closure. Lydia attempted to contact me again through a different number. She said she needed to talk about logistics. I replied once, asking her to direct all communication through legal counsel. She did not respond after that. Her parents reached out separately. Harold asked to meet. Sandra came with him. Lydia did not. They did not apologize on her behalf. They did not defend her either. Harold told me Lydia had moved back into their house temporarily. He said she was angry, then quiet, then angry again. He said she kept insisting she had been pushed into decisions she never intended to follow through on. Sandra asked me whether I believed that. I told her intention mattered less than preparation. Sandra nodded, slowly, as if something settled into place. They asked if I planned to pursue anything further. I told them no. I told them my interest ended where shared obligations ended. Harold said he respected that. They did not ask me to soften anything for Lydia. That mattered more than an apology would have. At work, the situation stabilized. HR sent a follow-up confirming no action was required on my part. The security report from the lobby incident was archived. Coworkers stopped asking questions and returned to normal conversation patterns. Kevin told me quietly that Lydia had reached out to 2 people in the office trying to explain her version. Both declined to engage. Reputation, once it detaches, does not reattach easily. Dylan Price disappeared from the situation entirely. Mark Ellison confirmed that Dylan had stepped away from public-facing roles temporarily and was no longer involved in any projects that overlapped with mutual contacts. That decision came from risk assessment, not morality. I did not hear from Dylan again. The wedding website stayed offline. Guests stopped asking questions. Some sent brief messages expressing regret. Others sent nothing. That silence did not feel cruel. It felt appropriate. A month passed. Life did not return to normal, but it did return to structure. I moved through days without checking my phone compulsively. I stopped replaying the motel hallway in my head. The memory did not disappear, but it lost urgency. One afternoon, a letter arrived from Lydia's attorney requesting a mediated discussion regarding shared property. There was very little shared property left. The request was less about division and more about acknowledgement. I declined mediation. My attorney replied with a summary of already resolved matters. That should have ended it. Instead, Lydia sent a handwritten note. It arrived without warning and without theatrics. She wrote that she had underestimated how quickly things could unravel. She wrote that she never intended for it to become public. She wrote that she felt abandoned when no one stepped in to help her manage the fallout. She did not deny what she had done. She reframed it as panic rather than planning. I read the note once. I did not keep it. Intentions explained emotions. They did not reverse outcomes. A week later, Camille Moore contacted me. She asked if I would meet her for coffee. She said Lydia did not know she was reaching out. Camille did not ask me to forgive anyone. She asked whether I believed Lydia understood what she had done. I told her Lydia understood the consequences, which was not the same thing. Camille nodded. She said that matched her experience. She told me Lydia had tried to blame everyone involved at different points. Dylan, her parents, me, Camille herself. Camille said the pattern was always the same. Lydia framed outcomes as betrayals rather than results. Camille said she was moving out of state for work. She said she needed distance from family dynamics that had been invisible until pressure revealed them. I wished her well. I meant it. Another month passed. Financial matters closed. The attorney sent a final summary. The numbers were smaller than they had been before the wedding planning began, but they were stable. Stability mattered more than totals. I returned items that had been purchased jointly. I donated what could not be returned. I changed the locks. I updated beneficiaries. I revised emergency contacts. These were not symbolic actions. They were practical ones. One evening, Lydia showed up unexpectedly at the house. She did not knock immediately. She stood on the walkway for several minutes before approaching the door. I watched through the window and did not move until she rang the bell. I opened the door. I did not invite her inside. She said she was not there to argue. She said she was not there to ask for anything. She said she wanted to tell me she was moving out of her parents' house and into a small apartment. She said she had taken a job that paid less than she expected. She said things had become very small very fast. I listened. She said she finally understood that control felt like safety until it disappeared. She said she kept expecting someone to interrupt the consequences, and no one did. I told her that interruption usually came before preparation, not after. She asked if I believed she had ever cared. I told her care existed in moments, but commitment existed in patterns. She nodded. She did not argue. She asked if I thought she would recover from this. I told her recovery depended on whether she learned or repeated. She stood there quietly for a long time. Then she said she would not contact me again. I told her that would be best. She left without looking back. Months later, I heard through indirect channels that Lydia was still telling versions of the story that minimized intent. Those versions did not travel far. People compared notes now. I also heard that Dylan's business stabilized and moved on. He did not suffer publicly. He did not benefit either. That seemed accurate. The final consequence was internal. I stopped thinking about what I could have done differently. The motel was not a fork in the road. It was a reveal. What followed was not a chain reaction I initiated. It was momentum already in motion. Trust does not vanish in one night. It erodes through small decisions made quietly and justified quickly. The night I knocked on the motel door did not end my relationship. It showed me it had already ended. Everything after that was simply alignment catching up with reality.